Hello, and welcome to TeachTalk, a project of creative universities. Today, I am talking to Dr. Jonathan Langdon of St Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia in Eastern Canada, where he teaches in the Department of Development Studies. Jon is also the Canada Research Chair in Sustainability and Social Change Leadership. Jon, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a bit about yourself and where, what, and who you teach?
Sure. So I am a associate professor at St Francis Xavier University, which is a small liberal arts university in Canada. I'm also a Canada Research Chair in Sustainability and Social Change Leadership. And the Canada Research Chair program is set up to kind of give professors time to dedicate to research. So I still teach in the Development Studies program at St Francis Xavier University, but I not as much as I did when I first got there. But having said that, teaching continues to be a passion of mine and something that I'm really interested in, and that I also dedicate a lot of my thinking to. I teach at a primarily undergraduate university, so most of my students are coming direct from high school. And they are, often coming from smaller spaces, and they tend to be coming because they're drawn to the fact that the university is small, that they're going to have that one-on-one contact with professors. So they're not necessarily looking for the big lights and the big noise of city. They're excited to come to a rural place. Many of them have roots in Nova Scotia, so there's a lot of family legacy around the university. So people who have for many generations have come to St F.X. So that there's good stuff around that, but there's bad stuff around that too. And I would say that predominantly my students are white, predominantly middle-class kids, and certainly in the last, say, 9 or 10 years, the university has tried to attract more kind of upper-class kids coming out of private schools to our university. So, they've changed things like the amenities that are available in residence to cater to private school graduating kids. So that has some real strong equity dimensions. Many of my cousins who went to St F.X., their kids didn't go to St F.X. because it became quite expensive. It's one of the most expensive tuitions around, and ironically, we continue to be, I think, either the 4th or 5th lowest paid professoriate in the country. So so you have some contradictions in the context that I teach in. We have international students coming from several different locations, but it's not a huge percentage of our student body. And Antigonish itself is nestled within, the legacies of colonial and an ongoing problematics of Canadian colonialism. Just down the road from Antigonish is a First Nation reserve called Buttonkeck. And just up the road from the university are several African Nova Scotian communities that have historical roots right back to the end of the War of Independence in the U.S., when quote unquote Black loyalists, folks who basically fought for the British, slaves or freed Black people, who fought for the British were granted land and freedom in Nova Scotia, and were given terrible parcels of land in very remote parts of the province. So those are some of the legacies that are on the doorstep of the university, but you don't really see those populations represented in the university as it stands right now. There has been effort over the last few years to try to reverse that, but I would say that's still a woefully inadequate response. So there's still a majority white, majority middle class, upper middle class campus with delusions of equity.
The next question then is in terms of critical creative teaching, right, which is really at the heart of the Creative Universities project. What does that mean to you, and how does it connect to your own pedagogic practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interested in the concept. I really, for me, the idea of bringing creativity into dialogue with criticality and critical pedagogy, I think is really important. So I resonate very much with that idea. I guess what I would say in terms of my own practice, there's one other element about St. FX that I should add, which is that one of the legacies of this area of Canada is that, and this is again one of the contradictions, it was also the place where cooperatives were started. And so there's a long history of fishing cooperatives and farming cooperatives. And one of those areas of impetus was a movement called the Antigonish movement that kind of emerged in the 20s and 30s in that area, out of that came a internationally focused institute called the Coady International Institute, that took these ideas of cooperatives, of kind of ground up development, of community-led development, of community-owned development, and really kind of connected that with the world. So for the last 60 odd years, there have been folks coming from around the world to St. FX and learning in community with each other about how to tackle, all sorts of different issues that are confronting their communities, and how to organize, so that they own their own path of development. So, that is a component of the legacy of St. FX that I really connect with, and that's part of what attracted me to the institute, to the university, I should say. And so part of my practice has really been about trying to draw on some of that legacy, and build relationships with some of the Coady participants who have come over the years, many of whom who have become development study students, and some of our best development study students, and then either stayed here in Canada and become, community activists, or who have gone back to the countries where they originally came from, and have, continued to make, astounding level of difference in their context. So I think that's definitely one of the stories of our program, and it's something that I feel very proud of. But at the same time, I think that our program is also a place where a lot of students who feel that the world is not right, have a sense of there's something wrong, end up on our doorstep, and then we take them through a 4-year program, which really helps to give them tools to peel back both some of their own assumptions and presumptions, but also to look more deeply into the power dynamics of our world and how decisions are made and who wins and who loses consistently over time, and how that leads to historical legacies of inequality and systemic racism and systemic misogyny, and the important thing, and I think this is where it connects with the last aspect of your thinking, is around hope. One of the things that we always do in our program is try to keep that door to hope and action open, and really seeing the two linked, by making sure that students have an opportunity to work in critical spaces, to meet with activists, to hear from people who have been involved in change efforts throughout their lives, and hear some of their challenges, their ups and downs. I think that those seeds really help give students something to nurture and then grow within themselves, to come out with a sense that, yes, things are not good. There are really, really severe challenges facing our world right now. But burying your head in the sand is not going to make any change. But picking up something and trying to do something with it, and then meeting others and working with them to do something, that's the seed of hope. That's where hope comes through action. I've consistently maintained it doesn't matter where that action happens. It's not like you have to look a particular way. It's not about performing. It's not about wearing the right shade of black. It's about engaging where you are, connecting with what are the particularities of your life, and seeing what can come out of making those connections.
Can you share like a couple of really kind of concrete teaching examples? I know you've written about some of them, and that's how I actually first met you. But what kind of comes to mind in terms of what you're actually doing in the classroom and how students are learning from it?
Yeah. Well, I think this kind of thing is always a work in progress. There's always new things that I'm trying. And definitely, the work of the past, where I would try to bring, different texts into dialogue, and that would help to challenge the sort of authority of a text that's or a particular author that's well recognized within Eurocentric thinking. So the example that I use in my work is taking a small segment of Adam Smith's work, the father, quote unquote, of economics and sort of neoliberal thinking, and then bringing him into dialogue with Ludo Equiano, who is an author, and a former slave, and orator, and a major voice in the abolitionist movement, and how the two were writing around the same time, and yet Equiano acknowledges Smith's work, but there's no way that Smith would ever acknowledge Equiano's work, right? And so, I try to use that as a way to open up students' eyes to, the power of historical expertise, the power of authority in deciding whose voice we listen to, whose voice we know about, and whose we don't. But I also try to use it as a way to, unpack. I'm trained as a literary theorist, as well as I had a lot of different trainings. So I look at voice, and I try to draw students' attention to, how is voice being constructed in these different pieces, and, the kind of disembodied voice of Smith versus, the very much rooted in story, in, where Aludo comes from, and that whole narrative, and some of the tragedies and horrors he experienced. That's his narrative voice, right? And so you look at these two, and I ask, students to think about humanity and think about, who comes out more clearly as being human and rooted in the human condition, and use that to explore, why is it that we give this disembodied voice more recognition than this one that is very much rooted in human experience. So, just trying to use those kinds of things to start conversations, to create a bit of a schism, a bit of an opening in people's minds about, what's happening today that is doing similar kinds of work of silencing some voices and privileging other voices, and those kinds of things. So, and I usually do that in the sort of first year or second year of students' work, so that, it's kind of opening up space. But one of the things that I've over the last few years that I've been working on is an idea of kind of scaffolding criticality, and understanding that, for an undergraduate degree in the Canadian context, it's a 4-year trajectory. And so how can you think about opening up, but not pushing too hard in the initial years, and then over time creating more and more spaces for students to start to own their own critical engagement and start to hand over tools that can really take them into new spaces. So one of the other courses I teach, this social change in practice class, this is the class where they do a local engagement with a social change organization or a movement. They get a chance to talk to a lot of activists. They read a lot of critical literature that's about, it's about some of the questions about community change. It's about ethics. It's about, who are we as people to get involved in change? It asks critical questions around power, around race, around class, around gender, around ability, so it's really kind of encouraging that hyper reflexivity, this kind of going, not just reflecting on things, but reflecting deeply and on an ongoing basis about what's happening, and also our own involvement in that, our own culpability, but also, our potential, our potential to get involved, that sort of critical hope piece. And one of the reasons why we focus on local context for placements there is a kind of a significant idea that there's a way in which, at least in the development context, many folks start, especially from a northern perspective, folks who are learning in institutions in, say, Europe or North America, will learn that change that's happening in other parts of the world is messy, is fraught, has a lot of power dynamics and issues and this kind of thing, but not recognizing that those same issues run through their communities, run through, the dynamics of their own institution, and so we'll conflate the messiness of change and the different power dynamics, the different agendas that people have. They'll conflate that with being something that's a product of culture, that's a product of particular geographies. And so I really want to challenge that from very early days, to say, here's a community that you know well, you think you know well. Now, as you get involved in local change and you start to hear some of the stories about, what's the the in-camera sessions of the local municipality, or the decisions that are being made by administration that completely push aside the expertise of people like the Indigenous student advisor, or the Black student advisor, or the LGBTQ2S plus advisor, and how those things have direct repercussions on people, and yet the very people you put in place to try to advise on these situations are ignored, right? And so just trying to really see how they can literally experience some of these moments of messiness, before they then go into a placement in somebody else's community, before they then go to some context in some other part of the world, or even in another part of say Canada, or if they're an international student, even if they go home to a different part of the country that they're from, and start to conflate that messiness with being development, and not understand that actually that messiness is present in change always, and there's always agendas, and there's always power dynamics. And so that, I think, is a key element of the teaching approach that I try to use, especially around experiential learning, and linking that to kind of hyper reflexivity, and then seeing that next stage of when students go into the kind of more extended placement of towards their fourth year and this kind of thing, as being a time for them to start to really build a relational understanding, skills around understanding that it's beyond just me and you. It's more towards that Aboriginal, Queensland Aboriginal group, and there's their sort of idea of solidarity, which is, if you come because you want to help me change, I don't really need your help. But if you come because you see that your liberation is bound up in mine, then we can work together. Then we can start to actually tackle these issues together. And you start to see that I am as much of an expert as you, and that kind of thing. So that's that real kind of trajectory that I see in the work that we're doing in the program, and I see my courses and the work that I do in my particular courses as being parts of those building blocks that really enable students to leave feeling like they have skills to do critical engagement. They have hyper reflex instincts to ask questions about themselves and about the world and about how things are happening. But they also carry this idea that change is complex, change is messy. There are power dynamics at play. Get involved with them, see how you can be part of things, but not in a kind of savior idea, but in a way that you see your future bound up in whatever comes out of these processes.